Serious, what is something scary that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? I was home alone for a weekend a few years ago while I was still in high school. After school one day I was driving home, and when I passed in front of my house I thought I saw some old lady in white clothes in my sister's room looking through the window. I thought it was stupid, so I went in the room to check out what it actually was, but I couldn't find anything. I pretty much forgot about it until later that night I got a call from a very panicked and scared neighbor saying there was some old lady pacing back and forth in my sister's room. I still have no idea what it was, and I've never seen anything like it since. You can keep yourself worry-free and never scared by staying secure with Dashlane. Dashlane can be your one-stop shop for your digital identity by managing all of your passwords so you don't have to keep track of all of them. They also keep your personal info and financials secure, making your digital life safe. Dashlane works across all platforms including all Apple products, PCs, Android, Safari and Chrome. Dashlane also has a secure autofill feature that works for personal information and credit cards, saving you time when shopping online, a VPN to prevent prying eyes from tracking what you're doing, and so much more. My favorite feature that Dashlane offers is complex password generation. It's always hard for me to make and remember complex passwords, but Dashlane makes it so easy to be secure. Go to dashlane.com Updoot to get Dashlane for free on your first device. Dashlane sounds awesome. I'll make sure to use the link in the pinned comment below with a link in the description to check it out. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitors center with offices, and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house, and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitors center on my walkie-talkie and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half mile up to the office. I made my co-worker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. The fact that the bulb was still warm as proof that you weren't lying to your co-worker is terrifying. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and cuddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote, but he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. My family owns a decent sized horse boarding facility, and when we first had it going we used to do bed check as a family. Bed check is just making sure all the lights and fans were off, as well as looking at the horses for injuries and if they had blankets during the winter. Well, we had just got back from eating out and it was a moonless night during fall. As we stepped out of the truck, this large light grey mass stood up and took off loping towards our pastures. It was about the size of a single cab pickup truck. It made no noises other than it hitting the ground as it ran. The only other proof that it was real to us was the horses that were turned out at night screamed and stampeded across the pasture it had jumped into. We did a double count of all the horses that night and not a single one was missing. I still have yet to see it again, and I hope I never do, or at least there is some explanation for it. When I was in uni I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to, often between 12 AM to 3 AM since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning I decided I was hungry but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding. I started shaking. The works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beating up someone from my uni. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway. I dreamt I was being choked and woke up to find my own hands around my throat. I once had a dream that I was fighting in a war and had just taken cover in a little trench when I felt something on my back. I looked behind me, and there was a man sitting there tickling my back. I woke up, and it turned out I was trying to scratch my back in my sleep. Probably too late, but better late than never. So much weird stuff like this has happened to my family over the years, particularly with my mom. Below are a couple fan favorites. 1. My parents had been married for maybe a month. They were in bed sound asleep when all of a sudden, my mom jumps up and wakes up my dad. Jimmy, there's blood everywhere. We have to help them. Please. My dad tried his best to calm her down and figure out what she was talking about. My mom had explained that she saw a car with a German license plate on the side of the road, that there had been an accident and they needed help. My dad tried to console her, to explain that it was all just a bad dream, but she wasn't having it. So to appease her, they got in the car and drove to the spot my mom thought the accident was. And sure enough, at the exact spot my mom said, there was a car on the side of the road with German plates and emergency flashes on. Upon closer investigation, there was nobody in the car. If they needed help, help had already come. 2. My parents had just had their first child, my oldest sister, Kathy. They had been living in Italy at the time. My dad was in the Air Force and had brought her back to the US to introduce her to the grandparents, my dad's parents. So their first night there, my mom was asleep in the front bedroom, jet lagged. My dad had gone out to hang out with his brothers, and in the middle of the night, this woman walks into my mom's room, waking her up. She sits down on the bed and says, "Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to welcome you to the family." My mom was scared, obviously, but figured this was some relative or family friend or something that came over. The woman walks over to the bassinet where my baby sister was sleeping. "Is this your daughter?" My mom nodded. "She's beautiful. It's lovely to meet you both." And then she leaves. My mom wakes up the next day and is having breakfast with my grandmother when she brings it up. "Who was the woman that came over last night?" My grandmother had no idea what she was talking about. My mom told her the whole story and my grandmother asked what she looked like. My mom said she was tall, had long white hair and was wearing a blue dress. My grandmother's face went as white as a sheet. She rummaged through some old pictures and pulled one out. "Is this her?" she asked my mom, who nodded in return. "That's my mother. She's been dead for 20 years and we buried her in a blue dress." In my childhood home I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear mum typing away at the computer. One day I got up and called out to mum assuming she was down there working as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there. so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. One morning I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mum at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try catch whatever was causing it and to try discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years and we learned just to kind of live with it as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared. The whole mysterious typing, you know, if I hadn't ran I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time I was on the computer at home by myself when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life and was hesitant going in that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. Have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet. Should have left word open. Probably too late, but here goes. I was working at a hotel in Albuquerque, the graveyard shift. I had been talking to the security guard and he asked if he could get a ride home. So instead of waiting for 30 minutes for my shift to end, I just left and left a note for my boss that said I left early because my brother was stranded outside of town and needed me to get him. Total lie on my part, but I needed a good excuse to leave early. I drop off the security guard at his place, then go home and go to sleep. A couple of hours of sleep and I wake up to my phone ringing. It was my brother. He tells me he is stranded outside of town and he needs me to go get him. I tell my brother the lie I told my boss and how much of a coincidence his calling me is. He says that's not weird, he will show me what's weird when I get there. I get there and ask him what is weird. He puts his phone up to my ear and plays a message that he got when he woke up that morning. It's a voice that kinda sounded computerized but mostly just creepy sounding. It says, "You're stuck." Freaked us both out. Never figured out where the call came from. Strangest, creepiest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I'm a little late, but screw it. I was in first grade, hanging out at recess with a friend. He was shooting some hoops outside and I was playing DS, sitting on the pavement. I remember him asking me if he could make a shot from halfway across the court. I told him he could try, but he probably wouldn't make it while looking at my DS. Suddenly, my dad asks me what I mean, and when I look up I'm sitting on my living room carpet, talking to my dad, and it's dark out. I was sitting in the same position, playing the same game, same level, and same exact spot in the level. Everything continued normally that night, and I didn't tell anyone at the time, but looking back it is really freaky. I thought it was a dream for the longest time, but thinking about it, it didn't really feel like a dream, and I don't really remember dreams that well. Pretty sure I lived in a haunted house for a while. Strange things. For one, I always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway I would swear I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats and someone's they'd be in my room sleeping and then all of a sudden they would sit bolt up and stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. One day in my bathroom, the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lose hold of all of the items. The thing was, the shelf wasn't loose or hanging and all the stuff had to bounce out of a 2-inch high lip into the sink. One time in the middle of the night, my sister's 100-plus-year-old dresser she got as a gift from our grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton and it was built like a tank. Sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing. Mom and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house. Only I wasn't home or I was in my room. They said they saw a man in shadows that was about my height. One day we also ran into the old owner and my mom casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot of stuff. I moved out around that time. I do not miss that place. In 2002 I lived in the East SF Bay Area with my husband and 2 toddlers. I was grieving over the sudden death of my mother a month before. She'd had a major heart attack and died at 52 years of age. On an average day, I left my babies at home with my husband to run a quick errand by myself. I drove a block over through downtown Haywood to hit up the grocery store. I was on my way home and stopped at a red light waiting to make a left turn. The intersection had all blind corners so it was difficult to see oncoming cars. My light turned green. I glanced both ways, waited the appropriate second and stepped on the gas pedal. It would not move. I tried again, nothing. The car behind me honked. I looked down under my pedals quickly to see if something had possibly rolled under the pedal and found nothing. I looked up and suddenly a huge work truck loaded down with equipment ran his red light at what must have been 50 miles per hour. I was stunned. I gasped, quickly pulled myself together, stepped on the gas pedal and it worked with no hesitation. Suddenly I smelled my mother's favorite perfume. Really amazing experience. In 1975 I was flying an army helicopter doing night training in blackout conditions near Fort Hood, Texas. I was flying down a draw with a small seasonal creek in it which was the new paradigm, designed to mask the aircraft from Russian radar. I was at the controls, my co-pilot on the map. We were low and slow treetop to treetop. Suddenly I had the compelling sure knowledge that I must do an emergency climb, which I did, climbing almost vertically. As I pulled the guts out of the aircraft and with my nose pointed up to the stars in my chin bubble I observed the leaves of a cottonwood tree being pressed aside by the plexiglass of my chin bubble. After a couple of seconds and now a few hundred feet above the canopy, my co-pilot and I stared at each other with wide eyes and the knowledge we barely avoided death. "How did you see that freaking tree?" he asked me. I never did tell him that I didn't, because I have never known how to explain it. I went on to fly helicopters for 37 years, accident free, and I still can't explain what happened that night. 7 years ago I lived in a 2-story farmhouse. It was built in 1908 and was both large and old. I was packing clothes and putting them in a small unused bedroom. I was wearing my MP3 player and, the last time I checked, it showed 3/4 battery life. I was on my 4th or so trip and was hauling a load of shirts on hangers. It occurred to me the closet was empty too. Perfect, I'll just hang them back up in there. This closet was almost a second room. It had a short glossy wooden door. The area of was thrice as long as wide, with hardwood floors. The lacquer still smelled, even though I'm sure it was fresh 100 years ago. I ducked fully inside and thought, this is a weird little place to be. Suddenly, the music doubled in volume and changed to something that wasn't music. It was like, I don't even know, rapid nonsense, fast electronic babbling. It scared the entire frick out of me. I flew straight out, looked at my player and it was dead. I'm a pretty rational guy. That MP3 player would sometimes show more battery life than it actually had. It's done that before. And maybe the sounds were some sort of malfunction before shutting down. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I'm telling you, it shocked and frightened me to the core. My skin felt electric for an hour after. I never felt comfortable in that room again. So, I was staying at my aunt's house in Mexico. My cousin's room had 2 beds so I slept in there. I remember not being able to sleep well and I had a bit of pain coming from my thighs. I had sweatpants on and somehow had scratches on my inner thighs, almost like a bunch of cat scratches. My aunt came in and searched the bed for anything but never found anything that could have scratched me. She also noticed that I had a bit of bruising on my neck, as if someone had tried to choke me. It was just me and my cousin. Definitely freaked me out and I rarely ever go visit my aunt anymore. If I do, I stay for a few minutes only. Sorry for bad formatting, I'm on mobile. After my grandpa died, my grandma said she could feel someone getting into bed with her nearly every night, but we didn't believe her. One night I was watching TV in the living room trying to fall asleep when I heard footsteps in the hallway leading to my grandma's bedroom. I looked out into the hallway and couldn't see anyone. and this happened for probably a minute. Immediately after the footsteps stopped, the TV turned off. I stayed awake for another hour or so but didn't hear anything after that. Thanks again to our sponsor for this video, Dashlane. Make sure to use our link and try it for yourself today.